John Bane isn't the kind of name that makes it into documentaries or true crime podcasts like Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy. Type it into a search bar, and you won't find glossy specials or long opinion essays. You'll get fragments instead, like a line in an appellate court brief, or a short article from a local paper stripped of detail, or a case number tucked inside state archives. That's all. And maybe that's the most unsettling part. The American death penalty has its celebrities, men who become myths as much as murderers. But Bane doesn't belong to that gallery. He is one of the many who are sentenced, who appeal, who wait, and then quietly disappear. His story is about erasure, and about how a man can be documented so thoroughly and still almost vanish. On November the 17th, 1988, Memphis police got a call about a welfare check on one Dr. Royce Frazier, a 60-year-old physician who hadn't been seen in a couple of days. When they arrived at his house, they found his front door unlocked. That was the first red flag. The second red flag was what they saw inside. The place had been torn apart. Lamps overturned, ashtrays scattered. Furniture moved around like someone was looking for something specific. Or maybe someone was just really, really angry. But it's what they found in the bathroom that stops them cold. The man is lying in his bathtub, submerged in water. At first glance, you might think of drowning. A heart attack in the bath, maybe a tragic accident. But then you start noticing the details. There's a cloth gag stuffed so far down his throat, it's pushed his tongue to the back of his mouth. There's a plastic bag wrapped around his head, and an electrical cord tied tight around his neck. And here's the part that really gets you. A toilet plunger pressed down over his face, apparently to make sure his head stayed underwater. But this isn't drowning or an accident. This was torture. The medical examiner of the case, Dr. Jerry Francisco, would later testify that he found extensive bruising around Frazier's eyes, head, neck, arms, hip, tears and scrapes below his left eye, and abrasions around his neck from the electrical cord during the autopsy. The cause of death was said to be ligature strangulation with asphyxia. But the detail that haunts the case was that the examiner had found fluid in Frazier's lungs, which meant the 60-year-old doctor was still alive when he was put in that bathtub. He had drowned while conscious, with a plastic bag over his head and a toilet plunger holding him under. And that torture took time. He testified that while the victim could have been rendered unconscious in seconds or minutes, depending on how tight that electrical cord was pulled, his actual death would have taken several minutes. Several minutes of drowning while unable to breathe through the gag, unable to see through the plastic bag, and unable to surface because of the plunger. But who does something like this to an elderly doctor? So, Memphis police start with the obvious questions. Who was close to Dr. Frazier? Who knew if he had money? Who had access to his house? And who exactly would know his routines? So the investigation starts focusing on people who knew the doctor personally. And that's when they discovered Donna Lovett. Donna Lovett was a woman in her 30s who had visited Dr. Frazier's house before. She knew him well enough that he'd let her in without question. She also knew that he kept some money in the house. Worse still, she had a 24-year-old boyfriend named John Michael Bane, who, according to people who knew him, wasn't above taking shortcuts to get what he wanted. But the police investigation revealed that this case was something stranger and more than a simple robbery gone wrong. Because it didn't look like a crime of opportunity or of desperation or sudden violence. It definitely looked skillfully planned, methodically, and for days, and the planning involved something you could easily buy at any CVS pharmacy: Visine eye drops.
Visine calms upset eyes. It cleans to help get the dirt out.
According to testimony that would later emerge at trial, the woman and her boyfriend had spent days working out how to rob Dr. Frazier without getting caught. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, because she would visit the doctor, spike his beer with the eye drops, and when he had passed out from the tetrahydrozoline, the boyfriend would come in and clean out the safe. They even ran a test the night before the robbery on one of the woman's 2 children. And sure thing, the kid was unconscious within minutes. The plan should have worked, but something went catastrophically wrong on November 17, 1988. Maybe Dr. Frazier didn't drink enough of the spiked beer. Maybe his medical background had given him some tolerance for pharmaceuticals, or maybe he sensed something was off and only pretended to drink. Whatever happened, when the boyfriend showed up at the house expecting to find an unconscious victim, he found a 60-year-old man who was awake, alert, and ready to fight. That's when the robbery became torture and stealing money became methodical murder. And that's also when the killer revealed exactly what kind of person he really was. But the story of how the doctor died doesn't start on November 17, 1988. It starts days earlier, in a trailer in Ripley, Tennessee, where the woman, Donna Lovett, lived with her 2 teenage sons and her new boyfriend, John Bane. Donna's family wasn't really the normal type. Her son, Brian Lovett, 16 years old, had already attempted suicide twice. His sister had killed herself just months before the murder, and he had been in and out of mental institutions like Charter Lakeside and Memphis Mental Health Institute. The kid was a walking disaster because he also had a history of using cocaine, speed, marijuana, and alcohol. His younger brother Thomas wasn't much better off, and their mother was dating a man who apparently thought planning armed robbery was appropriate dinner table conversation, because that's exactly what happened. According to Brian Lovett's testimony at trial, he had sat there in their trailer and listened while his mother and her boyfriend worked out the details of how to drug and rob an elderly doctor who lived alone in a house near Memphis. Turns out that she knew him from previous visits, and more importantly, she knew that he kept serious money in his house, the kind of cash accumulation that comes from decades of medical practice. The plan they cooked up sounds like something from a bad crime novel. Donna would visit Frazier under some pretense. She'd spike his beer with the eye drops, which contain tetrahydrozoline, which works as a central nervous system depressant in large doses. Once the doctor was unconscious, her boyfriend would enter the house and rob him blind. But the part that shows you exactly how twisted this family dynamic was when, as mentioned earlier, they had decided to test the plan on Brian Lovett. The day after they planned the robbery, Donna and Bane had given the 16-year-old kid a beer containing eye drops. They wanted to see how long it would take to work, how deep the unconsciousness would be, and how long the drug would last. Brian had testified that within 5 minutes of drinking the spiked beer, he was out cold. Thomas Lovett, the younger brother, also testified that he remembered his older brother drinking the beer. It has worked somehow. So it was time for the next level. November 17, 1988, the plan went into motion. Bane, Donna, and her 2 sons piled into a car and drove to Dr. Frazier's house. There, they made multiple passes, checking to see if anyone's home. Bane told the kids he was going to borrow money from the occupant. But when they finally saw the doctor's car in the driveway, they knew he was there. But the timing had to be perfect. So Donna got out of the car and went into the house alone. Bane then drove the boys home and returned this time with Brian. It wasn't the end of his night. The boy sat in the car while his mother's boyfriend went inside to commit robbery and murder. They already had a signal system worked out. So when his mother flickered the porch light twice, that meant the coast was clear and that the doctor was drugged, unconscious, and ready to be robbed. According to Brian, Bane saw the signal and went into the house, leaving him sitting in the car outside. 30 minutes pass. Brian Lovett sat in that car listening to whatever sounds were coming from inside the doctor's house. He later testified that he could hear things, but that he stayed in the car like he'd been told. According to him, when Bane and his mother finally came running out of the house, they were carrying armloads of stolen property. He later testified that what stood out to him was not the armloads of items, but the blood he saw on Bane's gloves and the fact that his mother appeared distressed and crying. From his statement, Bane then described what had happened inside the house as they drove away. He said he had struck Frazier several times because he kept getting up. The plan to knock the victim unconscious with the eye drops had not worked because he had remained awake and resisted, forcing Bane to continue the assault. Brian reported that Bane admitted to beating him, then strangling him, and finally drowning him to end the struggle. Brian also testified that Bane claimed to have mutilated Frazier's groin, though the medical examiner later confirmed there was no evidence of such injury. Whether this was exaggeration or bravado, it entered the trial record. Finally, Bane had mentioned taking $726 from the house and commented that he had done such a good job he deserved a beer. But many claim that Brian's testimony was based on lies and that none of these events even happened. One woman named Elika Gray had said in a sworn statement that Brian told her that in exchange for a 35-year sentence, his mother had agreed to plead guilty and say that Bane was indeed guilty. But whether he was there or not, a crime was committed. After torturing Dr. Frazier to death for $726, Bane and Donna decided to celebrate. They drove to Florida, where they proceeded to act like they just won the lottery. Spending on new cars and expensive jewelry and flashing cash was the kind of conspicuous spending that makes law enforcement take notice, because stolen money always has a way of making people stupid. Bane and his crew went on a week-long shopping spree that would have made Pablo Escobar cringe. Florida in 1988, during the height of the cocaine cowboys era. This kind of behavior was guaranteed to attract police attention, and it did, because within a week of the murder, they were all in custody. But the arrest might never have happened if it weren't for one critical factor: Donna Lovett's jealousy. Co-workers later testified that in the weeks before the doctor's murder, Donna had spoken openly about her jealousy. They said she had warned that if she could not have Bane, no one else would, and that she would see him locked away beyond reach. Bane's cousin, Alicia Gray, also told the court that she had heard similar words, with Donna insisting that both of them would end up behind bars. On that same night, she recalled, Donna had attempted suicide by taking a number of pills, and it was Bane who had driven her to the hospital. After Memphis PD confirmed that there was indeed a corpse exactly where she said it was, Bane was charged with the robbery and murder. To understand why his case unfolded the way it did, it helps to step back to Tennessee in the late 1980s. Violent crime in Memphis was climbing. In 1989, the city reported one of its highest murder rates to date, with more than 200 homicides logged that year alone. Political campaigns leaned hard on promises of law and order, and the Tennessee legislature had revised its capital sentencing statutes only a few years earlier, tightening aggravating factors to make sure prosecutors could pursue death in a wider range of cases. So when Bane's case reached trial, Shelby County's reputation mattered as much as the details of the couple's relationship. The county carried a distinction that weighed heavily over the trial. Since the 1970s, its courtrooms had produced more death sentences than any other county in the state, which was almost half of all capital judgments in Tennessee. It was not the largest county, nor even the one with the most homicides. What it had was a culture where the jury often followed prosecutors into capital territory, and where life without parole was treated as compromise rather than default. Prosecutors knew how to frame aggravating factors, and the jury were known to follow. In that environment, once Donna came forward, the trajectory of the case was clear. On November 19, 1988, 2 days after the killing, she told Memphis detectives everything: the rehearsal with her son, the signal system with the porch light, and Bane's admission that he kept beating the doctor because the man kept getting up. Prosecutors knew Shelby jury were often persuaded by aggravating factors like cruelty, avoidance of arrest, or murder committed during another felony, and Donna's account supplied two of them at once. Also, the testimony of Brian Lovett placed Bane at the scene, described the planning, and recounted the confession about the torture and murder. But defense lawyers tried to erode his credibility, stressing about his mental illness, drug use, and shifting statements. Yet the medical examiner's findings on the gagging plastic bag, electrical cord, drowning, ransacked house, stolen property recovered in Florida still aligned with his core story. So, against this backdrop, mitigation evidence could not compete. Witnesses called to testify had described Bane's troubled background, brain damage, and family losses, probably in a bid to exonerate him. Even a lady he later married testified to her devotion. But the jurors were accustomed to weighing aggravators with practiced seriousness, and they found the murder atrocious, cruel, and concluded it was designed to silence a witness. In 1990, John Michael Bane was sentenced to death and moved to Tennessee's new death row at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution in Nashville. The appeals started almost immediately after the death sentence, and they've been grinding through the courts for 3.5 decades. In 1993, the Tennessee Supreme Court affirmed the conviction but remanded the case for resentencing. They had no problem with Bane being guilty because the evidence was overwhelming, but they had major issues with how the jury reached its death sentence. They had originally imposed a death sentence after it found evidence of 2 aggravating circumstances, as said earlier in this video. But the second circumstance was the problem. According to them, you can't use committed during a felony as an aggravating factor when the underlying charge is literally felony murder. It was like getting a speeding ticket, and then an additional penalty for driving while speeding. Double jeopardy wrapped in legal jargon. So they went back to court with the same witnesses, same gruesome details, same family of criminals testifying against each other. But the prosecution just had to use different legal arguments this time. However, the jury reached the same conclusion, which was the death penalty. This time, the aggravating factors were bulletproof and stated as heinous, atrocious, or cruel because of the systematic torture, and avoiding arrest because Bane said Frazier had to die since he could identify his accomplices. In 2001, the Tennessee Supreme Court affirmed the new death sentence and even set an execution date of November 6, 2001. However, the day came and went, and Bane was still breathing. His lawyers had moved into post-conviction appeals with claims of ineffective counsel, constitutional violations, jury bias, and prosecutorial misconduct. Every possible legal challenge designed to delay the inevitable. The appeals kept coming for another decade, and in 2011, Tennessee courts finally said enough was enough and denied his remaining challenges. That should have been the end of the story. Crime committed, criminal caught, justice served. But in America's death penalty system, nothing is ever that simple. While Dr. Royce Frazier has been dead for over 35 years, John Michael Bane is still alive, still on death row, still waiting for an execution date that may never come. But the thing about Bane is that after his conviction and death sentence, he essentially vanished from public consciousness. No books, no documentaries, no Wikipedia page, and if you Google his name today, you'll find maybe 3 results: a bare-bones Murderpedia entry and a couple of legal database citations. This isn't because his crime was forgettable. Poisoning someone, beating them, strangling them, and then drowning them with a toilet plunger is the kind of methodical brutality that usually spawns true crime podcasts. But Bane committed his murder at exactly the wrong time in exactly the wrong place. Memphis, Tennessee. In 1988, Memphis had bigger fish to fry. The crack epidemic was exploding, gang violence was spiking, and one dead doctor probably didn't make headlines. So Bane disappeared into the Tennessee death penalty system, which is where he's been sitting for the past 35 years. The only place he still exists is in court documents. Shelby County Criminal Court transcripts, Tennessee Supreme Court opinions, federal appellate briefs, and all of that. Thousands of pages documenting the same basic facts: Visine eye drops, cloth gag, plastic bag, electrical cord, toilet plunger, bathtub, and death. The trail doesn't end with a best-selling book or a Netflix series. Instead, it starts with a manila folder in a courthouse filing cabinet, containing the transcript of a trial that most people have forgotten happened. The story of how a man tortured an elderly doctor to death for grocery money and then disappeared into America's most expensive form of slow-motion execution. If you want to see more chilling videos like this, like and subscribe, and stay tuned for more.